At the dawn of the new millennium, Seoul, like a precious pearl of South Korea, shimmered beneath a canopy of neon lights. The city never slept, pulsating with an unending rhythm. Bustling streets, overflowing with people hurrying about their lives. Elegant restaurants where deals were made over glasses of wine. And of course, dark alleys that held their own secrets. But beneath this glamorous facade of prosperity, beneath layers of rapid economic growth and the pursuit of fleeting trends, something sinister was brewing, something that was destined to plunge the glittering Seoul into a maelstrom of fear and terror. From September 2003 to July 2004, Seoul was shaken by a series of brutal murders, each more elaborate than the last, as if the criminals sought to surpass himself in cruelty. The victims were people seemingly unconnected, yet sharing a common thread. They were either wealthy, elderly individuals or representatives of the sex industry. The perpetrator acted with astonishing audacity, leaving behind a trail of blood that caused even the most seasoned police officers to shudder. He earned the moniker the Raincoat Killer, a name that seemed to underscore his stealth and ruthlessness. After all, a raincoat is a symbol of disguise, impermeability, and the killer, like the rain, could arrive unnoticed and disappear just as silently, leaving only a wet trail of blood behind. The first murders appeared chaotic, devoid of any discernible logic. But as time went on, investigators became increasingly convinced that behind these atrocities lurked not just a reckless killer, but a cold, calculating predator, methodically stalking its prey. Initially, the police were bewildered. The murders in the opulent mansions of the wealthy were attributed to unsuccessful robberies that had ended in tragedy. However, the absence of forced entry, strange details at the crime scenes, and most importantly, the rising number of victims forced law enforcement to reconsider their initial assumptions. The atmosphere in Seoul was heating up. Newspapers were filled with headlines about the new killings, adding fuel to the fire of panic among the population. People were afraid to go out on the streets after dark, and the doors of their homes were locked, with all 7 locks. Enhanced security patrols were organized in the elite districts, but even this couldn't quell the fear that had settled in the hearts of the citizens. Each new victim only intensified the feeling of helplessness and vulnerability. The citizens increasingly asked themselves the same question: who would be next? And where did this elusive killer hide? Amidst the prevailing chaos and widespread fear, investigators, gritting their teeth, embarked on painstaking work, attempting to piece together the scattered fragments of a terrifying mosaic. They desperately sought the answer to the question of what lay behind these gruesome crimes. Every trifle, even the most insignificant detail, every trace discovered became invaluable keys to unlocking this chilling mystery. At the very heart of this nightmare loomed Yu Young-Chul, a man whose name had become synonymous with absolute evil. His past was dark and cheerless, like an abyss that had swallowed all hope. Yu was born in 1970. His childhood was shadowed by poverty and endless deprivation. He grew up in an underprivileged family where cruelty and violence were commonplace. From his earliest years, aggression and tendencies towards antisocial behavior manifested in the boy. He constantly clashed with his peers, and his academic performance at school, to put it mildly, was poor. The young man hadn't received the proper upbringing or support, which distorted his perception of the world. He grew up embittered, envious, with a heart full of hatred for those around him. He especially despised those who had wealth, considering them the cause of his misfortunes. In wealthy people, he saw the embodiment of success and prosperity, which it seemed to him had been unjustly stolen from him. As a teenager, Yu began committing petty thefts and other crimes. His aggressive nature and propensity for violence only intensified over time. Several times he had to spend time behind bars, serving time for various offenses. In prison, his bitterness grew stronger with each passing day. There he learned to hide his feelings, carefully plan every step, and skillfully manipulate people. It was within the prison walls, investigators believed, that Yu first began to plot his revenge. Following his release, Yu married, but it brought him no joy. The marriage was brief, quickly dissolving, leaving Yu even more embittered and alone. His wife, weary of his volatile temper and unemployment, left, taking their child. This loss struck Yu with devastating force, pushing him towards committing unspeakable acts. Beginning in September of 2003, Yu initiated his bloody hunt. He meticulously selected his victims like a wild beast, stalking them, studying their habits and daily routines. His first victim was a 73-year-old woman. Yu killed her in her own home, inflicting several blows with a hammer. Others followed. Yu убивал своих жертв с неистовой жестокостью, используя разные орудия, включая молоток, нож и даже самодельное оружие. Он не испытывал ни малейшего сожаления, а, напротив, находил извращенное наслаждение в мучениях своих жертв, словно получая от этого какое-то дьявольское удовлетворение. Вскоре Ю изменил тактику. Теперь его жертвами стали женщины, работавшие в секс-индустрии. Он выслеживал их, заводил знакомства, а затем, под предлогом оказания сексуальных услуг, заманивал в свой дом. Там, в стенах его жилища, происходила жестокая расправа. Полиция начала замечать странную связь между жертвами, но потребовалось время, чтобы осознать, что все эти убийства – дело рук одного человека, одного безумца. Многих терзает вопрос, почему Ю Йонг-Чхоль избрал именно такой способ убийства, охотясь на богатых и проституток. Мотивы его были сложны и запутаны, но, пожалуй, главными из них являлись ненависть и жажда мести. Ю питал лютую ненависть к богачам, видя в них виновников своих несчастий. He saw them as living embodiments of social inequality, symbols of injustice, and believed they deserved punishment for their wealth. Beyond that, Yu harbored a deep hatred for women, especially those who worked in the sex industry. He blamed them for all his misfortunes and torments. He considered them despicable and unworthy of even a glance. He craved revenge for what he perceived. They belonged to everyone, while he, Yu, was doomed to loneliness, with no chance to find a family or experience the warmth of human relationships. It's worth mentioning another equally important motive, an insatiable thirst for power and complete control. Yu derived a perverse pleasure from deciding who would live and who would die. He reveled in impunity, gaining boundless power over his victims, humiliating and tormenting them until their death. Each murder was for him a way of self-affirmation, an opportunity to demonstrate his strength and superiority over others. The police, realizing the monstrous nature of what was happening, threw all resources into investigating the series of brutal crimes. A special investigation team was formed, comprised of the finest detectives and experienced forensic experts. However, the case unfortunately progressed extremely slowly. The killer was incredibly cautious, like a shadow, meticulously covering their tracks, leaving behind not a single clue. The authorities understood the gravity of the situation. They needed to find even the slightest hint pointing to the criminal's identity. First, the archives were reviewed. All materials from previous unsolved cases were studied in the hope of finding some connection. Recordings from surveillance cameras were analyzed. Witnesses were questioned meticulously, and the smallest pieces of evidence found at the crime scenes were examined. Hundreds of suspects underwent interrogations, but they all turned out to be innocent, like a thread breaking in the void. Soon, the investigators realized that their opponent possessed a high level of intelligence. He was well prepared, and his knowledge of forensics was astonishing. The criminal was confident, like a poker player, unafraid of leaving traces, believing he could deceive justice and escape punishment. One of the main problems for the investigation was the absolute lack of information about the identity of this ruthless killer. The police could only guess who was behind these brutal murders, who this cold-blooded executioner was. Then, when hope had nearly vanished, an event occurred that proved decisive in catching Yu Young-Chul. In July of 2004, the police received a report about a missing young woman engaged in prostitution. She had arranged to meet a client, but never returned home. Investigators immediately connected this case to the series of brutal murders that had been terrorizing the city for several months. The search for the missing girl began immediately, with all available law enforcement resources deployed. After searching the apartment, where the girl was supposed to meet her client, the police discovered terrifying traces of blood splattered across the walls, along with other evidence indicating a monstrous crime had taken place. Chaos reigned everywhere, as if a deadly whirlwind had swept through the room, obliterating everything in its path. At the crime scene, a seemingly simple detail was discovered: a phone number written on a scrap of paper. It belonged to a man named Yu Young-Chul. The police were closing in, sensing the imminent conclusion to this chilling story. When the detectives arrived at his home, they were stunned by what they saw. There, like macabre trophies, lay blood-stained belongings, cold weapons, and other evidence, irrefutably pointing to his involvement in the murders. Yu was arrested. His criminal odyssey had finally reached its end. At first, he vehemently denied his guilt, desperately trying to wriggle free and evade punishment. But under the weight of the irrefutable evidence and the compelling proof presented to him, Yu Young-Chul eventually crumbled and confessed to committing all the horrifying murders. Yu Young-Chul's confessions, delivered within the walls of the courtroom, shocked everyone present to the core. He stated that he had taken the lives of 20 people, but investigators, based on circumstantial evidence and the analysis of crime scenes, suspected that the number of his victims could be far greater. His confessions were incredibly detailed and chilling. Yu Young-Chul recounted how he planned and committed his crimes, how he experienced a perverted pleasure in feeling power over his victims. He coldly, without a shadow of remorse, described every minute detail of the murders, as if recounting some ordinary event. During the investigation, it was revealed that Yu Young-Chul didn't just kill his victims. He brutally dismembered their bodies, burying the remains in various locations, attempting to conceal the traces of his monstrous deeds. Furthermore, he confessed to cannibalism, claiming he had eaten parts of his victims' bodies. These admissions horrified even the most experienced investigators who had witnessed many gruesome cases. The trial of Yu Young-Chul became one of the most high-profile and resonant in the history of South Korea. He appeared before the watchful eyes of the public and under the scrutiny of the media. In the courtroom, where fate was being decided, there wasn't room to swing a cat. Crowds of people were eager to hear the details of the monstrous atrocities. During the court hearings, Yu Young-Chul behaved provocatively, showing not the slightest remorse. He continued to insist on his innocence, claiming that he was forced to commit these crimes. But the evidence presented to the court spoke for itself. Irrefutable and undeniable. The court found Yu Young-Chul guilty of murdering 20 people and delivered its sentence: capital punishment. This verdict was met with relief among the people. Many were convinced that Yu Young-Chul deserved the harshest penalty. After the sentence was announced, Yu Young-Chul attempted to appeal, but the appeal was rejected. Until the end of his days, Yu never admitted his guilt, continuing to insist on his innocence. Yu Young-Chul was executed in 2004. His death, though it brought an end to this chilling story, could not erase the suffering of his victims from people's memories. The Yu Young-Chul case caused widespread public outcry in South Korea, as if tearing apart a veil of peace. It made people think about the nature of violence, about those dark corners where evil is born, and about the role that society plays in shaping the personality of a criminal. People began questioning the need for more careful monitoring of the population's mental health, understanding that illness could hide beneath outward respectability. Astonishingly, the case of the Raincoat Killer revealed other deeply rooted problems within South Korean society. It illuminated the issue of social inequality, festering like a sore, the discrimination against women that had long been hushed up, and the sharp problem of prostitution, which people preferred not to discuss openly. Many began to understand that Yu Young-Chul's victims were not just victims of one madman, but symbols of those social ills that were eating away at the country like hidden poison. The consequences of Yu Young-Chul's case are still felt in South Korea today, like an echo of a long-past tragedy. It became a bitter reminder that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, lurking beneath the mask of everyday life, and that cruelty and violence can thrive even in the most seemingly prosperous society. This story also became a harsh lesson for law enforcement agencies, forcing them to review their working methods and strengthen controls. It forced them to fundamentally reconsider their approaches, tighten crime control, and establish closer interaction with society. This case clearly demonstrated that solving the most complex crimes requires the combined efforts of everyone who cares and is ready to act. The case of Yu Young-Chul became the personification of fear and horror, but at the same time, a symbol of hope. Hopes that society could stand against violence and lawlessness, and that justice would ultimately prevail. Yet, even after years following the execution of Yu Young-Chul, questions continue to plague people's minds. What exactly drove Yu Young-Chul to commit these horrific crimes? Could this tragedy have been prevented if appropriate measures had been taken in time? What factors influenced the formation of his personality during the 29 years he lived free? And the most crucial question, how can society be protected from monsters like Yu Young-Chul. The story of Yu Young-Chul is a story about the destructive power of hatred, the deadly danger of indifference, and the incredible importance of the fight for justice. This story reminds us of the need to be vigilant, compassionate, and to always remember the value of human life. Despite all the horrors Yu Young-Chul committed, his case became a symbol of hope. Hope that justice will triumph and that society can protect itself from evil. I remember the first time I heard about the case. It was 20 years ago. But the newspaper headlines still flash vividly in my memory, screaming about what had happened. Fear enveloped the city like a thick fog, making people lock their doors with 7 locks and constantly look over their shoulders. And then, amidst that nightmare, hope was born. Hope that the criminal would be punished, that justice would prevail, and that we could feel safe again. Perhaps the realization of this hope is the most important lesson we can take from this terrible story. Because even in the darkest of times, when evil seems all-powerful, there is always room to believe in something better.